Hi, everybody, and welcome to Taxes in Retirement. My name is Brad Gotto. I'm going to be your educator for today. I'm excited that you're here. That said, 2019 set a record. That record was the number of people that attempted to climb Mount Everest. The number was 1,120. There were 1,120 people that tried to summit Mount Everest in 2019. Now, we all know that most of them, or at least not all of them, made it to the top. When I looked into the numbers, I was actually quite surprised. 858 of the 1,120 actually made it to the top. I thought that was a lot. That's pretty good. That said, when you dive into the numbers a little bit more, you'll realize that of the 858 that made it to the top, over half of them were guides or Sherpas or high altitude experts, whatever you want to call them. In other words, nobody attempted to go up to the top of Mount Everest on their own. They all took a guide or an expert with them. We all know climbing mountains can be dangerous. Obviously, Mount Everest, the tallest and most dangerous of all. Taking a guide with you on this 2-month journey is really important. Now, of the 858 people that made it to the top of Mount Everest, unfortunately, only 850 of them made it down. You see, that year, 8 people died on the descent. And the reason I bring this up in a tax workshop, because I see taxes the same way. It's a mountain climb, and then there's also a descent. All of your working years is climbing the mountain. You're on your way up to that summit, and then you retire and you have to go back down the other side. And just like Mount Everest, the treacheries of taxes as it relates to retirement tend to be slippery and harder, more tripwires, however you want to put it, on the way down the mountain than they are on the way up the mountain. If nothing else, you have to think differently, act differently on the way down the mountain than you did on the way up. And again, that's just true of taxes. That being said, jumping into our agenda for today, I'm going to give you a quick introduction into who I am, why I'm your educator for today, and I have a lot of other free resources for you. So outside of just our 90 minutes together today on taxes, I've got a lot of other things you can tap into for education on this descent down the mountain, whether it's tax related, it's income planning related, it's Social Security related, you name it. We've got all kinds of education for you to tap into if this is the type of education that you're looking for. Also, I'm going to define the problem. So on the way down the mountain, there's a lot of different things that could trip you up or cause pain on the way down the mountain. But the primary problem that we're going to talk about today is taxes, and we're going to define that. Then we're going to go into taxes 101. We're going to kind of level set and make sure we all understand how the tax code works and how our 1040 works. Then we're going to get into taxes 201. This is where I've carved out what I see as the 4 biggest tripwires on the way down the mountain that can cause you to stumble and fall, specifically as it relates to taxes in retirement. Then I'm going to give you 3 concepts to take home. You see, my favorite classes to take when I was in school were ones that gave you concepts that made an immediate impact on your life. Education without action is worthless. And so I want to make sure that I give you actionable items today to take home and hopefully save yourself some money on taxes. So real quick introduction. My name is Brad Gotto. I will be your educator for today. I was born and raised in the state of Iowa. I currently live in the state of Minnesota. Wife, kids, that whole kind of thing. That being said, I also own and founded a wealth management firm that specializes in this area of distribution planning. This is what we do. The financial services industry is full of people that are really good at helping you grow your piles of money, taking your income and turning it into an asset. Our specialty here is helping you down the mountain, which is why we're your educator for today. That being said, you inevitably, as we go throughout today, are going to have questions. We want to make sure that we answer your questions. So, housekeeping item, just so that you know, on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a chat box and a Q&A box. For today, the chat box is disabled. We're going to use the Q&A box. And anything that you type in, any questions you put into that question and answer box are going to come to us privately. And so the whole group, and there are a lot of you here today, are not going to see your questions. So feel free to ask any and all questions that you have. Obviously, being your presenter today, I don't have the ability to answer all of those questions. So I have another helper with me here today. Today, our helper is Darren. Darren is a highly trained fiduciary advisor on my team that happens to specialize in taxes. Darren was actually born in the state of and raised in the state of Wisconsin. Darren's also married. They have a dog that they named Huck Finn. He's an outdoorsman. He loves hunting and fishing and all that kind of stuff. And I couldn't be more excited to have Darren here with us today to sit in the Q&A box and make sure all of your questions get answered. That said, Darren, you mind popping your camera on really quick and saying hi to everybody? I would appreciate it.
Hey, welcome everyone, and hats off to you for taking some time to learn more about taxes and retirement. Listen, Brad, myself, and the team, we teach a ton of classes like this across the country, and I'm fortunate that I get perspective. I talk with thousands of your peers going through the same things that you're going through. One blaring reality that's stuck out over the years is that everyone, whether their education, their title at work, how much money they have, how long they work with their money person, everyone is searching for how all these pieces fit. They've maybe done a lot of work in the past in different areas of investments, but everyone's tipping towards that point of wondering how it all works. How do these levers pull at what time? So one good news for you is that this is what we do. This is what we're going to preach today. Ultimately, we're going to talk about taxes and how that ties into all these areas of wealth management. So as Brad mentioned, I'm going to be in the Q&A box being a keyboard warrior for about the next 60 minutes plus. The best practice I've found over the years is that this is a virtual class. So unlike a normal classroom setting, if you raise your hand, today we're not going to stop. So as those questions kind of spark and you start to think about what it means to you, I would tell you to write them down, whether it's in the Q&A box, whether it's on a piece of paper. Those questions around what textbook topic we've talked about is exactly what we'll start with. And when we build those tax maps in the clarity visit, which Brad's going to talk about in a minute. So again, I appreciate all you coming. And without further ado, Brad, let's get started.
Awesome. Thanks for doing that. I really appreciate it. Now, resources. Outside of just the 90 minutes we're together today to learn about taxes and retirement, our firm, Fiat Wealth Management, has something we call Fiat University. This is where all of our education lives. I'm going to give you the best that I got today, but we have a ton of educational content for you that is free. All you have to do is go to our website and find it. It is all there for you as a free resource. Just to point out a few things. We write blogs, educational blogs, literally every single week. We have a podcast called Every Day is Saturday. We release 2 episodes a month. You can tune into those. We also have something called an Inner Circle workshop. It's very similar to this. It's going to be a digital workshop over Zoom. The difference is they're always the last Wednesday of every month. They're at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. And it's topic rotating. So it may be on taxes, but also may be on something like Social Security or Medicare, Medicaid planning, or the risks of longevity in retirement, or how to get rid of the risks of sequence of returns in retirement. There's a lot of different topics that we handle, but we also do those every single month live. So if you want a bunch of free education or tapping into kind of some educational content, I would encourage you to go to our website, fiatwm.com, fiatwm.com, and you're going to find everything that you need on our website from an educational perspective. Last but not least, another free resource for you. After doing tons of educational workshops like this, the most common piece of feedback I've gotten is, hey, Brad, great education, loved it, but some of the things that you talked about, some of those concepts you gave me to take home, I don't know how to do some of those things, or I just have more questions that I need to ask. So what we've created is a 30-minute tax clarity visit for you to do just that. The tax clarity visit is after this workshop today. It's kind of an extension of this workshop, and it's 30 minutes long and it's free. And it's an opportunity for you to get one-on-one with a highly trained fiduciary professional in this area of taxes and retirement and ask all of your questions and take advantage of some of the free resources that I'm going to make available throughout this workshop today. So if you want to take advantage of that and schedule that 30 minutes one-on-one, you can do so now if you want to. In the bottom left-hand side of your screen, there's going to be a little pop-up box that comes up, should come up about right now. If you want to, do me a favor, click on that link. It's a little kind of purplish blue button. Once you click on that link, what you'll realize is it's just going to take you to a calendar that's going to allow you to schedule that 30 minutes. I would encourage all of you to take advantage of it. It's a very useful 30 minutes where we can take some of these concepts you're going to learn about today and begin to help you take action on some of these items. I'll give you an opportunity later as well. If you want to try to schedule it later, I'll give you the pop-up box again. But for now, feel free to X out of that box if you haven't already scheduled, and we can take care of that later. All right. Really quickly, I'm going to play us a video, a fun video, because at the end of the day, we've talked about this mountain climbing and the ascension up the mountain and into retirement and this idea of saving money. And then, of course, the descension down the mountain and figuring out how to take that pile of money that you saved and turn it back into a paycheck. And a lot of times on the way down the mountain, you have to do things opposite of the way you did on the way to get up there. And taxes are not unique in that area. And so I'm going to play a quick video of somebody that tells a story better than I do about how sometimes you need to think the opposite in life of the way you have to this point. While I'm doing that and playing that video, it's about 2 minutes long. Would you please do me a favor? Go into that Q&A box and answer 2 questions for me. So while you're watching the video, answer these 2 questions. Number 1, just tell me a little bit about yourself, name, age, and if you're retired or not yet retired. And if you want to add more color to it, like, hey, retired 5 years ago or something like that from being a school teacher, great. The more information, the better. It's going to help us help you. Okay. The other question I would love for you to answer in that Q&A box is, why are you here? What are you hoping to get out of today? What are you hoping to learn? What questions do you have? What concerns do you have? So again, while I play this quick video, go into that Q&A box, answer those questions, and I will be back in just a minute.
Every decision I've ever made in my entire life has been wrong. My life is the complete opposite of everything I want it to be. Every instinct I have in every aspect of life, be it something to wear, something to eat, it's all been wrong. Everyone.
Tuna on toast, coleslaw, cup of coffee.
Yeah. No, wait a minute. I always have tuna on toast. Nothing's ever worked out for me with tuna on toast. I want the complete opposite of tuna on toast. Chicken salad on rye, untoasted, with a side of potato salad and a cup of tea.
Well, there's no telling what can happen from this.
You know, chicken salad's not the opposite of tuna. Salmon's the opposite of tuna, because salmon swim against the current, and the tuna swim with it.
Good for the tuna.
George, you know that woman just looked at you.
So what? What am I supposed to do?
Go talk to her.
Elaine, bald men with no jobs and no money who live with their parents don't approach strange women.
Well, here's your chance to try the opposite. Instead of tuna salad and being intimidated by women, chicken salad and going right up to them.
Yeah, I should do the opposite. I should.
If every instinct you have is wrong, then the opposite would have to be right.
Yes. I will do the opposite. I used to sit here and do nothing and regret it for the rest of the day. So now I will do the opposite, and I will do something. Excuse me, I couldn't help but notice that you were looking in my direction.
Oh, yes, I was. You just ordered the same exact lunch as me.
My name is George. I'm unemployed and I live with my parents.
I'm Victoria. Hi.
Like George said, sometimes you have to do the opposite of everything you've been taught or trained to do. And like I said before, and I prefaced it, I don't think taxes are any different. So for all of you that answered those questions, most of you did. I really, really appreciate it. All the answers are kind of flowing in. We've got the advisor in the chat box answering all of those questions that have already come in, all the comments. The good news is most of the things you guys were hoping to cover today, are hoping to learn today, are part of the agenda. So I'm really excited to be able to give you this information. That being said, we're going to define the problem. And here it is. What you see on the screen is the top marginal tax rate every single year from 1913, which is the very first year they taxed you and I through ordinary income taxes, through today. And if you look at that, what you realize is there's no consistency to it. they're all over the board. We've had really low taxes. We've had really high taxes. When taxes were, ordinary income taxes first came into play, the highest rate you could pay was 7%. Great Depression went up to 60-something%. By the end of World War II, it was 91%. You can see it there on the screen. 1970s, it was about 70%. And then over the last 3 decades, we've been hovering in that mid to upper 30% range. And so trying to plan for taxes today and in the future with such a moving target can be a challenge. But I would argue that's not even the biggest challenge. The biggest challenge is that you're the first generation ever, period, ever, to do what you're attempting to do, to retire in your 50s and 60s, maybe 70, and then live for another 10, 20, maybe even 30 years on your own pile of money. You see, your parents didn't even have an option to put money into IRAs and 401ks because they weren't invented until 1974 and 1978. So it wasn't until halfway through their working careers that became a thing. Your parents lived primarily on pensions, and their retirements weren't nearly as long as yours. Your grandparents didn't retire. They worked and they died. And so this concept of having to save your own pile of money and to live on that pile of money and have to do it for possibly 2 to 3 decades is a new phenomenon. And it brings about a new set of challenges. The top 2 expenses for retirees today are healthcare and taxes. So of all the challenges you face in retirement, overpaying or tipping the IRS, as I like to call it, tends to be one of the biggest challenges retirees have. Fast forward to your retirement. From the 1970s, about 50-something odd years ago, till today, you've been saving money and putting it away and putting it away and putting it away. And I don't care if your pile of money that you've saved is $10,000 or $10 million. The collective you, after talking to thousands of your peers at this point, is that 80% of your money is in a bucket that's never been taxed, the green. 15% of your money is in an after-tax taxable bucket, the blue, and 5% of your money is in a bucket that is tax-free. Of course, the biggest problem with that is that green part of that pie still has to be taxed, and it has to interact with your Social Security, with your pension, with any part-time income you may have coming in the door, with any inheritance you may or may not have coming in the door. And all of those things happen to affect your Medicare premiums. And so it can get very convoluted and confusing. And so we have to figure out how to pay our tax in retirement. That being said, quick disclaimer, I am not a CPA. I do not file taxes for a living. That's not what I do. I'm a comprehensive fiduciary financial advisor. My job is to essentially be the CFO for the families that we work with. And from an educational perspective, you should know that because my job is to help you plan for taxes, not help you file for taxes. All right, taxes 101. How do they work? So we're going to level set, like I said before, and make sure that we all understand exactly how your 1040 works. This is a really good time for me to tell you on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a tab called Handouts. There's a lot of information in that tab for you to keep. You can download all of those handouts and keep those. Those are for you to keep. One of the things that's in there is a guided note-taking page. So if you have the ability to print at home, I would recommend that you print that out and take your notes there. Everything that is there is going to be referenced at some point today. The other thing that I would recommend you open immediately and just have on your screen or nearby somehow, some way, is the 2024 tax guide. All of the numbers that we're going to go through today are going to be in that guide. So you don't have to try to take frantic notes. I've given you all of the tax numbers. Every example we're going to go through today is going to be of a married couple, just to be consistent. But make no mistake, whether you're married or single, the concepts are exactly the same. The numbers are different for single filers than they are for married couples. But again, I've given you all of those numbers. All right, let's jump in. Taxes 101. So as I see it, there are 2 sides of the tax code. There's what I call the 7-bucket system and what I call the 3-bucket system. We're going to start with what I call the 7-bucket system and the more ordinary way that we pay taxes. They also happen to be called ordinary income taxes. I call it the 7-bucket system because there are 7 tax brackets. They start at 10%, as you can see on the screen, and they go all the way to 37%. The way this works, and the reason I want to bring this up, is because almost everything that hits your 1040 is taxed this way. Not everything. There's a couple exceptions. We'll get to that. But almost everything is taxed this way. And one of the biggest misunderstandings is this. If I were to tell you that our example today is going to be a married couple with $100,000 of income. What marginal tax bracket does that put them in? Well, if you look at the screen, you'll realize that puts them in the 22% tax bracket. Does that mean they pay 22% on every dollar that comes in the door? Of course not. So the way this works is you start the year in the first bucket, which happens to be 10%. In 2024, that bucket for a married couple holds $23,200. So the first $23,200 that comes in the door is taxed at 10%. Once that bucket is full, you can't put any more income in there. You have to go to the next bucket. That's the 12% bucket. That is $23,201. Goes all the way up to $94,300. So any income between $23,201 and $94,300 is going to be taxed at 12%. And then for this married couple with $100,000 of taxable income, that last $5,700 is actually going to be taxed at 22%. But again, they're not paying 22% on every dollar that comes in the door. You can kind of visualize it as that waterfall. Maybe you have a bird bath in your backyard with multiple layers in it where the water flows at the top. It fills up the first reservoir. Once that's full, it flows to the next one. Once that's full, it flows to the next one. That's kind of how this works. We start at 10. Once that's full, you start paying 12. Once that's full, you start paying 22. And then you just kind of work your way up the tax code. Okay. So in the 7-bucket system, we pay ordinary income tax rates. Now, if you pulled up the guided note-taking page or you've printed it off by this point, you'll notice that under where it says Taxes 101, another thing that it references is the TCJA. TCJA. If you're taking notes at home, I would write that down. TCJA stands for Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So if you're writing that down, do me a favor, circle it 2 times. Circle it once and now circle it again. That's your reference point, because there was a massive piece of tax legislation called the TCJA that was passed in 2018. Actually, 2017 went live in 2018. The net effect is it put the vast majority of Americans' taxes on sale. Most of you listening in today saw a reduction in your tax bill due to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, whether you realize you did or not. Okay. Now, the reason I had you circle it twice is because there's only 2 years left of the TCJA as it relates to you and I and our individual taxes, 2024 and 2025. This law is set to sunset or go away at the end of 2025, which means that in 2026, a lot of the provisions that we enjoy today that made our taxes go down are going to expire. Let me give an example. So if you look on the screen there again, we've got those 7 brackets. The first one's 10, then 12, 22, 24, so on and so forth. When the TCJA expires, the 10% bracket will stay 10. 12 goes to 15. 22 goes to 25. 24 goes to 28. You get the point. So one of the provisions that's going to change is we're going to go back to what the tax brackets were in 2017. Well, it begs the question, well, would you rather pay 12% or 15? It's an obvious answer. And so knowing that, now having that information, that should affect your tax planning and the way that you make decisions. We'll unpack that more as we go today. If you want to visualize the tax code, here you go. It looks like a set of stairs. Income coming in the door across the bottom, and then we walk that set of stairs. So we start at 10. You can see that's a very small step. Not a lot of income fits into that 10% bucket. Then 12, then 22, 24, again, so on and so forth. Now, I'm going to point out a couple of things here. There are a couple of jumps in the tax code you should be aware of, because 10 to 12 is not a very big jump. From $1 to the next, paying 10% to 12%, yes, it's more, but it's not significantly more. But from 12 to 22, that step is a doozy, and it's one you should watch out for and plan for. And then later in the code, we have another big step from 24 to 32. So unlike the stairs going into your house or to the second level of your home, the stairs rise and run is not the same. Every step is different. And so it represents opportunities from a planning perspective to try to avoid going up a step, or maybe even to fill up the step that you're in and take advantage of the bucket that you're in. There's different things that we're going to talk about today of how to take advantage of this set of stairs that you see on the screen. So what we've just got done defining is marginal tax rates. Okay. I call it the 7-bucket system. There's 7 tax brackets. Everybody starts in the first bracket. We work our way up. Whatever bracket or bucket you ended up in. So my example is married couple, 100 grand. That's the 22% bracket or bucket. That is your marginal tax bracket, but that does not mean you pay that rate of taxes on every dollar, as we all just learned. Now, there's also a 3-bucket system that I referenced earlier. This system has 3 brackets, as you would probably assume. They are 0, 15, and 20. If you're taking notes at home, what I would write down is capital gains taxes or capital gains rates. And then I would write down cheaper. These rates are just less. Okay, so if you obviously would pay less in taxes, we would all choose that, right? And so the more you get into the 3-bucket system, the better, just generally speaking. But unfortunately, as you would probably assume, there's not a lot that fits in that bucket. There's only a couple of things that are taxed at the 3-bucket system. Again, 0, 15, or 20%. What are they? Long-term capital gains and qualified dividends. So dividends from a stock that you get have a chance to be qualified, which makes them taxable at these preferred or preferential or cheaper rates or capital gains rates. They also have a chance of being ordinary dividends, which means you don't get the preferential tax rates. They're going to charge you full boat retail rates or 7-bucket rates. And so it's very important to understand if you have a dividend paying portfolio or you're planning on living on dividends in retirement, or even if you don't plan on living on your dividends, but you have money invested in companies that spit off dividends, that you understand if they're ordinary dividends or if they're qualified dividends, because it changes the tax status of that dividend. Now, there's a couple of things that affect how a dividend is taxed, whether it's qualified or not. Some of it has to do with when you got into the stock, and some of it has to do with where that company is domiciled or where it's based, if it's based in the United States or if it's based overseas. We'll get into that a little bit more later. The other thing that's taxed at these 3-bucket rates are long-term, key there, you can write LT in your notes, long-term capital gains. What is that? That is growth of an investment that's not in a retirement account. So it's a brokerage account. It could be farmland. It could be real estate. It could be anything that's not tied to an IRA, 401k, 403b, or anything like that. Okay. If you buy, I'll use a simple example. If you buy Apple stock for $1,000, it grows to $2,000, and that was in your brokerage account, that $1,000 of growth, you have to pay taxes on. If you held that stock for what they consider a long time or a long term, then you get the preferred or preferential rates on that growth from a tax perspective. The definition of long term is 1 year. So I buy Apple stock, I sell it 18 months later, and I have to pay the taxes on the growth. Those taxes are going to be at these preferred or preferential rates, 0, 15, or 20. If I bought Apple stock and I sold it 30 days later, that's a short-term capital gain. They're going to kick you back to that 7-bucket system and make you pay full boat retail rates. So number one, it's important to know there are 2 tax kind of buckets or brackets, okay? The 7-bucket system and then the 3-bucket system. It's important to know that. It's also important to know how they interact with each other, because they do. What happens in the 7-bucket system does affect what happens in the 3-bucket system, because they both hit your 1040, okay? We'll talk again, unpack that a little bit more later. If you want to map out or visualize the 3-bucket system, it looks like this. The red is the 0, 15, and 20% rates. Now we've got this weird brown thing going on the screen. What is that? There's technically, now this is getting kind of detailed, so hang with me here. Not important that you memorize this. There's technically what's called NIIT tax, or net investment income tax, that gets added in. This starts getting added in for single filers at about $200,000, for married filers about $250,000. And it's an extra 3.8% that you have to pay. Okay, so just know that it exists. Again, not something that I would worry about memorizing necessarily. Whether you do your own taxes through TurboTax or you hire a CPA or H&R Block to do your taxes, this is all going to be calced into their software. Now, when you think about your 1040, the first thing you have to do is add everything up. Everything that came in the door in the 7-bucket system, everything that came in the door in the 3-bucket system, and then you get to subtract some things. So the first thing you get to subtract, everybody gets to subtract, is a standard deduction. It's called a standard deduction because everybody gets it. In 2024, The standard deduction for a married couple is $29,200. It's half of that for a single filer. What does that mean? That means that the first $29,200 for a married couple, you don't have to pay taxes on. You get to deduct all of that income and avoid hitting the tax code or the grid or the set of stairs, however you want to look at it, okay? And so if you think about it, the first $29,200, I don't pay any taxes on. At $29,201 of income coming in the door, and again, that income could be passive income, doesn't have to be earned income. So in retirement, that could, it doesn't need to be a job. This could be IRA distributions. It could be Social Security income. It could be your pension, a lot of things, right? The first $29,200, we get to deduct. At $29,201, I'm going to hit the grid. The grid, as a reminder, starts at 10%. That's the first tax bucket. So then I start paying 10%. Now, we all get that standard deduction, but you also have the ability to itemize your deductions. In other words, take your own write-offs. So the government will just give you $29,200, married couple, $14,600, single filer, or you can just use your own write-offs. You can write off things like healthcare expenses to a certain extent, dental expenses to a certain extent, state and local income taxes, real estate taxes, interest on your mortgage, gifts to charity, things like that. And so if you're one of those people that's keeping track of all that stuff and kind of itemizing it at the end of the year, in order for your itemized deductions to mean anything to you, they have to be more than the standard deduction. So let me give you an example. Let's just say you're diligently keeping receipts. You hand them all to your CPA at the end of the year, how much you paid in mortgage interest, how much you paid in real estate taxes, state taxes, gifts to charity, all that kind of stuff. And your CPA puts it all on your Schedule A, which is the tax form you use for itemized deductions. And at the bottom, the total of all of your write-offs, married couple, is $20,000. What does that mean to you? Well, it means nothing. Because would you rather write off $20,000 or take the standard deduction of $29,200? Well, obviously, I'd rather write off more than less, but you don't get both. And so I've just met a lot of people that just assume that you get both. I get the $29,200 and whatever else I have goes on top of that. That is not how it works. And so a lot of people, as an example, are giving to charities or churches or any nonprofit, thinking that not only is it good, to give money away and just be generous, but I'm also getting a tax break for that. When in reality, a lot of times it's not true, because they're not giving enough to the point of superseding that standard deduction. And so from a planning perspective, tax perspective, really important to know before year end where your itemized deductions are going to land, and if it's going to supersede that standard deduction, and if there's anything else you can do to help yourself out when it comes to deductions. We do it all the time. It's part of standard tax planning. Now, the other thing you should be aware of is if you're over the age of 65, you get an additional deduction. If you're single, it's $1,850 you get to deduct on top of the standard deduction. If you're married, it's $1,500 per spouse that's over the age of 65. So if both of you are, it could be an extra $3,000. The other thing that you get to do is look for credits. Now, I think of credits like Easter eggs in the tax code. You just got to know how to find them. There's different types of credits. A lot of them retirees aren't going to be eligible for, but let me give an example of one that you might be. It's something like the healthcare tax credit. So a tax credit can work just like the healthcare tax credit, as I explain it. If you are not yet old enough for Medicare, so you're not yet 65, but you're retired, so you lost your employer-sponsored health plan, and so you need to go out to the private markets to get healthcare. When you do that, what you're going to realize is it's very expensive. It is possible to get a tax credit to subsidize almost the entire thing, if not the entire premium. Well, how do you get the tax credit? Well, it depends on what your modified adjusted gross income is. And so understanding where your year is going to end before the year ends is really important, so that you know what things are going to look like, so that you can plan appropriately. And as an example, my mom is retired. She's not yet 65 years old, but cannot necessarily afford the health insurance premiums that she was quoted for her private health insurance, which was $1,100 a month. But because we did some tax planning and her modified adjusted gross income is going to look the way the government likes it to look relative to credits, she's going to get $1,050 tax credit every month. to pay for that? Well, the premium's $1,100, which means she only has to pay $50 of the premium because she's got a tax credit of over $1,000 a month to help her pay for it. So really important to understand what credits are and make sure that you take advantage of them. Now, on the right-hand side of your screen in the handouts tab, I'll reference this multiple times today. One of the handouts that you have is called a tax report. Okay. That tax report is a couple pages long. It's just a sample one. Okay. But that tax report, one of the things that's on it is a look at different credits that are in the tax code and whether you are eligible for those credits or not eligible for those credits. That report that you see there is something all of you have access to or can get just by attending this workshop today. So for attending, one of the things we can give you is your own version of that tax report. Of course, that's just a generic one. But if you want your own personalized tax report to figure out things like, hey, are there any credits that I'm not aware of? What marginal tax brackets am I in? Right, you talked about taxes being on sale. I don't know if my taxes are on sale, if the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act affects me. That report can answer all of those questions for you. So there's an example one in the handouts tab. Take a peek at that. But this is something that we can help you with just for attending today on a complimentary basis. So great segue into your first checkpoint. Now, you can call it a checkpoint, or we can call it what it really is, a to-do list. If you want to take advantage of the education that you're getting today, I've created your to-do list for you. This is part of that guided note-taking page that's in your handouts. So if you don't want to write all these out yourself, feel free to just use that handout. Now you've got your to-do list after you leave today to make sure that you're not overpaying or tipping the IRS each and every year. So here's your first 3 to-dos. Number 1, have you taken advantage of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act? In other words, do you know if your taxes are on sale and how much they're on sale? And if there's anything you should be doing in 2024 and 2025 before the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expires. The first step in figuring that out, if you don't know the answer to that or have not already done that, is just allowing us to give you that free tax report. Okay. Have you taken advantage of the different tax buckets, the 7-bucket system versus the 3-bucket system? Do you understand what's coming in the door that's taxed at that full ordinary income tax rate versus what's being taxed at that capital gains rate? If you have dividends coming in the door, do you know if they're ordinary or qualified? Questions like that. Okay. And then last but not least, have you maximized your deductions and exemptions and credits on your taxes? Are you taking full advantage of your credits? And are you looking through your itemized deductions and planning appropriately for things like your charitable giving to make sure that you're getting the most write-offs you possibly can? All right. Now we're going to move into taxes 201. Like I told you at the beginning on the agenda, this is where I've carved out 4 specific items as it relates to the tax code on the way down the mountain. The 4 biggest tripwires, I believe I called it. And so we're going to talk about those. It's required minimum distributions, capital gains, Social Security, and Medicare. So let's dive right in. All right, RMDs. If you are unfamiliar, the IRS will force you to start taking out your IRA and 401k type money. It could be 403b money, it could be TSP accounts, 457 plans, any pre-tax qualified account that you have. There comes an age where the IRS says you cannot defer the tax bill any longer. You have to start paying me off. Now, it's interesting because if you think about it in your working years, while you were saving all of this money, the IRS, Uncle Sam, I'll call them for now, Uncle Sam told you, hey, you cannot spend this money or I'm going to penalize you. So if you can, I guess, technically spend it, but if you do, you're going to have to pay the tax bill that you deferred and you're going to have to pay an extra 10% penalty. Now, at your magical age of 59 and a half, the IRS says, okay, no more penalty. You can spend the money as you see fit. You just got to pay the tax bill that you chose to defer when you put the money in there, which, by the way, note to the wise, the deferred tax bill inside of these accounts never goes away. It just is deferred. Deferred taxes do not mean getting out of taxes. It means paying the bill later instead of paying the bill today. So at 59 and a half, you don't have access to that money without penalty. Then 13 and a half years later, the IRS comes back to you and says, hey, you know how I said you can't spend that money or I'm going to penalize you all the way until you were almost 60 years old? Well, now at the age of 73, you have to spend that money or I'm going to penalize you. So you have required minimum distributions that you have to take out of these accounts, RMDs. These start at age 73. Now, some of you on this workshop today may be confused because the age has changed multiple times in the last 3 years. RMDs now start at age 73. Last year was age 72. A couple years before that, it was age 70 and a half. Now, if you're born after 1960, it's age 75. So it couldn't be more confusing on when RMDs have to start, but know that they're coming. If you're not yet RMD age already, if you are already 73, you're very familiar with this concept, but you cannot miss them, because if you don't take that distribution, there is going to be a penalty for missing that distribution. That penalty used to be 50%. Now, they changed the law at the end of last year. It's 25%. There's a chance to possibly get out of it. But again, just better to not miss it. That being said, the way it works is this. You have to look at all of your pre-tax money, okay? You add it all together. The IRS just cares the total sum, right? They don't care about individual accounts. And I've got 8 different accounts with pre-tax money in them, IRA, 401k type monies. They just want the total. So in my example, the total is $1 million. So you have $1 million in pre-tax money. Then you have to look at the uniform lifetime table to figure out how much you have to pull out. The uniform lifetime table looks at how old you are and then gives you a distribution period. In my example, you're 73. So I've highlighted it there on the screen. At 73, your distribution period is 26.5. So what you do is you take that $1 million, you divide it by 26.5, and it's going to tell you how much you have to pull out of your IRA and 401k before year end. The RMD has to come out by December 31st of the tax year in which it's due. Okay. So it's not April 15th. You can't backdate an RMD into the last year like you can with IRA contributions and things like that. So note that. But in my example, the RMD would be $37,736. Why this is so important is because a lot of people don't plan for this. They don't know what's coming. They don't understand it. And then you get to the magical age of 73. These hit your 1040 on top of your Social Security, on top of maybe a pension you have or other distributions you're taking. And maybe it bumps you a tax bracket. Maybe it changes how your Social Security is taxed. Maybe it changes your Medicare premiums. Maybe it changes the capital gains rate you're paying on some of your long-term capital gains or qualified dividends. It can have this compounding effect. And not only that, but if you look at this uniform lifetime table, which is quite confusing, I get it. All these numbers, by the way, are in that 2024 tax guide handout. So you have this uniform lifetime table. Is the distribution period changes every year. Every year you get older, the distribution period, the number gets smaller. Look at that there. 26 and a half, 25 and a half, 24.6, keeps getting smaller. If you take your balance and divide it by a smaller number, the result gets larger. In other words, every year as you get older, you have to pull a larger and larger percentage of your account just for that RMD. So the percentage of your RMD gets bigger and bigger every year, which of course is going to have a bigger tax impact. The other thing of note here is just because you're required minimum distribution doesn't mean you can't take more than that. And so in this case, the RMD is 37,736. Can this person take more? Sure, they can. Should they? Maybe. We're going to get to that in concepts. Bonus item there listed on the screen says QCDs. If you are unfamiliar, QCD stands for Qualified Charitable Distributions. What that is you can, if you're of RMD age, now they didn't change QCDs a couple of years ago like they did RMD ages. So you can still start QCDing money at 70 and a half. Make note of that. So at 70 and a half, you're allowed to start taking IRA money out of your IRA, give it direct to a charity. You can't touch it. It has to go from you to the charity. Give it direct to the charity. And it will be a non-taxable event to you because you went to a charity. It's a non-taxable event to the charity, of course, but it also satisfies the required minimum distribution in that year that you took it. And so it's kind of like this triple positive, if you will. And so if you are charitably inclined at all, if you're giving any money to charity and you're of the age of 70 and a half and you're not doing it through a QCD, I would argue you're missing the boat or you're gifting in an inefficient way. So if you are of that age, you are giving more than $1 to charity, and you are unfamiliar with QCDs, make sure you ask about that in that Q&A box. Want to make sure we get your questions answered and get these QCDs to become something familiar to you. All right, capital gains. So we're going to put away the retirement accounts for just a second. I want to talk to you about your after-tax investments. Okay, so doesn't matter how much you have in after-tax investments. Here's what I've realized is a tripwire for most retirees on the way down the mountain. You've been saving money for 30, 40 years, maybe even longer. And just like living in a home, if you live in a home, some of you on this workshop today have probably lived in your homes for over 30 years. And you know as well as I do, I haven't lived in my house for that long, but even the short time I've lived in my house, you just accumulate stuff. I always like to ask the question, do you have more or less stuff in your house today than you did when you moved in, right? It's more. And it just tends to accumulate over time. Saving money, it's kind of the same thing. You just start saving money when you're young. You end up with multiple accounts by the time you retire. The money's kind of everywhere. And you have a lot of different investments, a lot of different mutual funds maybe, or ETFs or individual stock positions, or however you chose to invest the money. And what I've realized is most retirees' financial portfolios look a lot like a house that's been lived in for 30 years. There's just a lot of stuff and just a lot of, maybe call it inefficiencies or fat inside of these portfolios because it's just accumulated over the years. And that can become a problem in your after-tax accounts because these accounts are not like IRAs and 401ks where they're tax deferred and I don't have to deal with the tax bill until the money comes out. These are taxed as you go. And so these inefficiencies can cause problems on your 1040 year after year after year after year. Let me prove my point. One of the things that you have access to for attending today, we already talked about that tax report. How we can get you that tax report for free and kind of answer some of those questions for you about where you stand on the TCJA, if your taxes are on sale, that kind of stuff. Remember that? The other thing that you have access to just for attending today is an inventory, is what I like to call it. We can inventory your investments and just tell you what you own. So think about your house. Imagine if somebody were able to go through your house and inventory everything that you own and just tell you, hey, this is how many pairs of pants you have. This is how many spatulas you have. This is how many hammers you have. This is, everything. So that you could just see it in a nice and orderly fashion, go, yeah, there's a lot of stuff here I could probably get rid of and just make my life a lot more efficient. We can do the exact same thing with your investments. We can inventory the entire portfolio and then just give you a report back, which is an example like you see on the screen of what you own. Here's why that's important or why you should care. Here's an example inventory we did for a family last year that attended a workshop just like this. What you see there at the bottom of the page, and I'm going to zoom in, is this particular person owned 32 different mutual funds or open-end funds. Some people like to call them. Now, you may be thinking, I don't own 32 mutual funds. Maybe you do because you got some in this IRA, some in this IRA, some in this Roth, some in this 401k. They had 21 ETFs. The bottom line is they had 93,677 individual positions. So in other words, what we're doing is lifting the hood to those mutual funds, lifting the hood to those ETFs, to those closed investment trusts, those kind of packaged investment products that we all own, and saying, what's in there? What do we actually own? What stocks do we have? What bonds do we have? What real estate do we have? What commodities do we own? What's actually in there? And what we realized for this particular couple was that there was 93,677 individual positions. Now, what's interesting about that is if you bought every stock on the New York Stock Exchange, you would own less than 4,000 stocks. So if that's true, how in the world do you ever come into owning 93,000 plus positions? The answer is redundancy. And so in this inventory, what we're able to tell this couple is, look, I'll give an example here. There's a whole list there, but I've highlighted Microsoft. They own Microsoft stock 10 different times. If you look on the right-hand side where I just put the arrow, those are all the different mutual funds and exchange traded funds where they own Microsoft. So they own it in their iShares account, in different Vanguard funds, in a JP Morgan fund, a T. Rowe Price fund. Why this matters and why you should care. Two reasons. Number one, it's inefficient from a tax perspective. And number two, it's inefficient from a fees and expenses perspective. Let me tell you how. From a tax perspective, think of it this way. If I own Microsoft in this fund, an ABC fund over here, and I own Microsoft and XYZ fund over here, it is entirely possible that ABC fund is buying Microsoft stock on the same day that XYZ fund is selling it. So me as the investor, I have one of my mutual funds selling, one of them buying, and I end up with the exact same amount of shares of Microsoft. But if that's in a brokerage account, is that a taxable event to me? Of course it is. That could cause gains. It could cause losses, depending on the buy and sell transactions of that stock. But at the end of the day, it could cause a tax liability for me. And I could get a 1099 at the end of the year for those transactions, even though I own the exact same amount of Microsoft, but I have one buying and one selling. And the probability of that's pretty good when I've got 10 different funds owning Microsoft. What are the odds that all 10 of those funds are doing the exact same thing with Microsoft stock every day? Almost zero, right? And so it causes massive tax inefficiencies. The other thing it does is causes inefficiencies related to fees and expenses. Because you see, think about it this way. What are the odds? Take the top two examples on the screen. We've got iShares S&P Growth owns Microsoft. Remember on the right-hand side next to that red arrow. We also have the Vanguard's large cap ETF that owns it. What do you suppose the odds are that either iShares, Vanguard, T. Rowe, JP Morgan, any of these funds that you own are trading on your behalf for free? Of course, the answer is zero. Of course, they're charging us for that. It's just that you can't see what they're charging you, and neither can I. They're able to just wrap those fees and expenses into that fund and hide them. So what we realized in this particular inventory or audit, if you want to call it that, for this particular family was that the average fund that they own has a turnover of 87% per year. What does that mean? It means that 87% of the holdings inside of that fund were traded at some point during the year. So if you have over 90,000 positions, that means there's 80,000 trades happening in this example throughout the year. And with only 252 trading days in a year, you guys, that's over 300 trades a day. What are the odds that that's going to cause some sort of tax liability? I would argue pretty good. What are the odds that's causing a bunch of fees and expenses that you can't even see and don't know you're paying? I would argue likely to, it's absolutely the case. And so just like your home, it's really important after you've lived in the home for a while to go back and inventory everything and say, you know what do I own? I need to really actually figure out what I own and make sure that I'm being tax efficient with what I own and that I'm being fees and expenses efficient with what I own. So if you want us to run an audit or an inventory for you, again, just for attending today, that's something that you can get complimentary. I'll talk more about that tax clarity visit that we talked about at the beginning at the end. The third one is Social Security. Social Security is taxed based on provisional income calculations, okay? If you look at the 1040, which is one of the handouts on the right-hand side of the screen, I gave you a couple of pages of a 1040 to reference. You report Social Security on line 6A, but there's also a line 6B. Why is there two lines? Line 6A is how much Social Security came in the door. Line 6B is how much of that you have to pay taxes on, okay? Well, how much of it goes over to line 6B? Well, the answer is somewhere between 0 and 85% of what you wrote on line 6A. In other words, if I had $20,000 of Social Security come in the door, somewhere between 0 and 85% of that 20 grand is going to be taxed at whatever my tax rates are. So how do you determine where between 0 and 85 I get taxed? The answer is you have to know what your provisional income calculation is. Now, again, softwares do this for you automatically, but just so you know what's going on behind the scenes, there are 4 things that come into play. Half your Social Security benefit, all of your 7-bucket money, all your 3-bucket money, and any non-taxable interest you have coming in the door. You add those 4 things together, and then you have to apply these progressive thresholds to those numbers. And so as a married couple, going to stick with the married couple example, the first threshold hits at $32,000. At that point, every dollar above that threshold, half of it's going to be taxed and half of it will not. Any dollar above the $44,000 threshold and 85% of that's going to be taxed and the other 15% will not. So what I told you essentially is it is possible to have none of your Social Security taxed at a federal level. And I also told you that nobody pays taxes on 100% of their Social Security. Everybody gets at least 15% of it tax-free, okay? You just got to know and understand where between 0 and 85% of your benefit you're going to get taxed. So let me give you an example. If you want to live on $5,000 a month, that's 60 grand a year. You have 20 coming in from Social Security. So you pull 40 from your IRA to get you to 60. 20 plus 40 gets us to our $60,000 a year. Now, how much of your Social Security is going to be taxed? Well, in order to do that or know that, you have to know what your provisional income is. Well, in this case, the provisional income is $50,000. Why is it 50 and not 60? Remember, only half that Social Security benefit counts. So in this example, the Social Security is 20. Only 10 of that counts towards the calculation. All of the IRA counts. That gets us to 50. Run that through those progressive thresholds. The net effect is 55% of the benefit, or $11,100, is going to be taxed. The other $8,900 will not be taxed. Now, different example, same amount of income, $60,000 a year, but it's comprised differently. In this example, 40 of it's coming from Social Security and 20 of it is coming from IRA distributions. That changes the provisional income calculation, as you can see below. It's only $40,000. Run that through those progressive thresholds. The net effect is only 10% of your Social Security is going to be taxed. 90% is going to come in the door tax-free on a federal level. What you should learn from this is it's not about how much income you live on in retirement that is going to determine what your tax bill is. It is where your income comes from. So a lot of the questions that came out of that Q&A box, which again, thank you so much for all the questions. Keep them coming. You're keeping the advisor very, very busy. I appreciate that. Hey, I'm looking to figure out how to spend my money, which buckets I should be pulling from, when I should turn Social Security on, when I should take out of my IRAs, things like that. We get that question a lot, and a lot of you asked that today. One of the things you have to be cognizant of is, well, taking my Social Security changes things for me in retirement. It's kind of part of what I call a tax timeline. 59 and a half is a part of that. Age 60 can be a part of that. 62, when you can take Social Security. 63, when your tax return starts affecting your Medicare premiums. Age 73, when RMDs come due, things like that. There's these different points down the mountain that you need to be very cognizant of. And Social Security is one of them. The last one is Medicare. So just know this. At age 65, you're eligible for Medicare. And Part A, you're finally done paying for, but Part B and Part D, you have to continue to pay for. You have to start paying for now that you're on Medicare is a better way to put that. The premiums that you pay for Medicare Part B and Part D are income adjusted. So the higher your modified adjusted gross income is on your tax return, the more you're going to pay for your Medicare. Now notice what I didn't say. I did not say the more you spend, the more you'll pay for Medicare. I said the more income that shows on your 1040, the more you're going to pay. And that's an important note to make because I meet a lot of people whose modified adjusted gross income, because that's technically what it's based on, is higher than what they actually spend to fund their lifestyle. As an example, I've seen people that have $300,000 of modified adjusted gross income on their tax return, yet they only spent $70,000 on their lifestyle. Well, how does that happen? Well, maybe they're getting capital gains come in the door that they don't want and don't understand based on everything we just talked about before, inefficiency of portfolio. Maybe they have an RMD coming in the door that they don't want or don't need, but they have to pull it. Maybe they had an inheritance come in the door. Maybe they have deferred income from their previous job coming in the door. There could be a lot of things that cause excess income above and beyond lifestyle spend to come in the door that affect your Medicare premiums. And so understanding that is important. Knowing that your tax return helps determine what your premiums are is important, and planning for it is important. All right. One quick case study before we get to our concepts, because we've been talking about marginal tax rates this entire time. I want to talk to you about effective tax rates. In other words, as I walk that set of stairs that Brad referenced earlier, what rates am I actually paying? So remember the tax map? Here's that set of stairs. 10, 12, 22, 24. Remember we walked our way through this? And as we talked about, until you get through your deductions, you don't actually hit the grid, so to speak. Then once you're through your deductions, you pay 10. Once that bucket's full, you pay 12. We go up this set of stairs. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work out that nice and neat and clean. Let me give an example. We've got a married couple. John and Jane, they're 73 and 69 years old. They live what I call a Social Security retirement, which is just a fancy way to say that's all the money they spend. Now, they're one of those people who spend less than their 1040 shows. Why? In their case, they had $22,000 of long-term capital gains come in the door from their after-tax portfolio. Not anything that they necessarily sold. It was their mutual funds and ETFs, and not anything that they needed. It just had to hit their 1040. They had to pay the tax bill. Same thing with the required minimum distribution. They had a $43,000 required minimum distribution. Now, if you add all that together, John and Jane would be in the 12% marginal tax bracket. So we ran a report for them, just like we can run for all of you, the tax report, and it maps out their tax bills. Here's John and Jane's tax map. Now, you're going to notice right away, that's not nearly as neat and clean as the set of stairs that we've been looking at this entire time. In fact, if you look at it, as they've worked their way through that set of stairs, they're never paying the marginal rate of the bracket they're in. As you can see at the beginning there, they're paying 18.5, then they pay 22.2, and they're on the cusp of a period of time, not a very big period of time, but a period of time where their effective rate is going to be almost 50%. So of course, that begs the question, what in the world is going on there? How are you in a 12% tax bracket and ever pay a 50% or 49.95% effective rate? What is going on there? Because intuitively, in a 12% tax bracket, if I took a $1,000 IRA withdrawal in a 12% federal tax bracket, my tax bill should be $120, right? 12% of 1,000. But in that moment where we're at 49.95, what's happening is that $1,000 IRA withdrawal is in fact causing that $120 tax bill, but it's also changing your provisional income calculation for Social Security and taking some of your Social Security that wasn't being taxed and making it taxable. I got to pay that bill too. Those two things in tandem both affect your capital gains. And so some of those capital gains that came in the door that were in the 0% bucket are getting moved into or shoved into the 15% bucket. I got to pay that bill as well. Those three bills combined add up to $499.50 for an effective tax rate on that $1,000 IRA distribution of 49.95%. So mapping your taxes and understanding what that looks like and how your decisions are going to affect you is important, and it can really help you make good decisions. Let me give you this example. Most of us these days, if we're driving around and we're going to unfamiliar places, are no longer just kind of driving around aimlessly hoping to figure it out. No, what are we doing? We're using our phones. We're using Apple Maps, or we're using Google Maps, or we're using whatever app you use to map you there. And we're doing that because we know that's the most efficient way to get from point A to point B, is putting that map through that algorithm, and it's calculating out for us, here's the fastest way for you to get to where you want to go. You guys can do the exact same thing with your taxes. You can map out your taxes and say, okay, what's my liability going to look like in the future? Here's where I stand today. That's what the tax report is for. Here's where I stand today. I want to map out where I'm going and figure out the most efficient way to get there. In other words, I want to pay the least amount of taxes to get from point A to point B. Well, again, you can map that out. What you see on the screen is one of those maps. Armed with that map, we can make educated decisions on what money to pull, where to pull, when to take income, how to take income, when to turn on Social Security, and that type of decision making. Okay. All right. 3 concepts to take home. But before we get there, here's your to-do list off of Taxes 201. Number 1, have you performed or plan to perform any or future RMD planning? In other words, do you know what's coming? Do you have any idea when you hit the magical age of 73, what your RMDs are going to look like, how that's going to affect your taxes, and should you be doing something differently? If you are of RMD age, should you just be taking the minimum, or should you be taking more? Have you efficiently allocated your investments to lower all that turnover, the trading? You know, we talked about the analogy I gave here, if you remember, was the house and inventorying your home and making sure we don't have too much of any one thing, that we're not being inefficient with taxes and fees and expenses. Have you planned to maximize your Social Security and retirement, when to file, the taxes on filing, things like that? Have you performed efficient income planning as far as like creating a paycheck for yourself, knowing what buckets of money to pull from to create the most tax efficient paycheck that you can? And then lastly, Medicare planning. Do you understand what you're going to pay for Medicare premiums and how to keep your income down so you don't have to pay any excess Medicare premiums? All right, 3 concepts or case studies that you can take home with you. So if you've stuck with me to this point, don't leave now, because I want to give you some tangible things that you should be thinking about to save yourself some money on taxes before we leave. All right, number 1, I call this 3 types of money. Because at the end of the day, from a tax perspective, there's only 3 types of money. There's pre-tax money, there's after-tax money, and then there's tax-free money. For short, pre, post, and free is what I like to call them. Now, I want you to understand the concepts of your investments in every one of these tax buckets, whether that investment goes up or that investment goes down. What is my tax impact? So let's start with the up. So if I buy ABC company stock, which is on the left-hand side of the screen, and it goes up in value, and I had bought that in my IRA or 401k, 403b, or 457 plan, or whatever, how do I pay taxes when I go to use the money? Well, you had purchased that stock, ABC stock in this example, with pre-tax dollars. So the money you invested has not yet been taxed. It grows tax deferred, and when you pull it out, the whole thing is taxable at full boat retail rates. Now, had you bought it in the middle bucket, the post bucket or tax after tax bucket, you had to buy ABC company stock with money that's already been taxed, checking account style money, okay? The growth of that money, had it gone up in value, still has to be taxed when you sell that stock. So in an example, you paid $1,000 for the stock, it grows to $2,000, you're going to owe taxes on that $1,000 of growth. That tax bill may look different than the pre-tax bucket. As you can see there, we may pay long-term capital gains. And if you remember from earlier in the workshop, those are preferred or preferential rates or cheaper rates, 0, 15, or 20%. It is possible, though, that on the growth of that stock, you have to pay ordinary income tax rates. Remember, it's that long-term or short-term holding period that determines how you pay taxes. In order to get the preferred or preferential rates, it has to be a long-term gain. In order for it to be considered long-term, you have to hold that investment at least 1 year, okay? Whether that's ABC stock, that's, an investment in farmland or something like that, okay? The tax-free bucket or Roth IRA, primarily. There's other ways to get tax-free money, but we'll just stick with the Roth as our example. Checking account money has to go in, already taxed money. The growth of that money is tax-free. And so if I put $1,000 in, it grows to $2,000. That $1,000 of growth is tax-free in a Roth IRA, as long as the growth of that money has been in the Roth IRA for at least 5 years. So there's a clock that has to start in order to make that money tax-free. That clock has to run for 5 years. That clock starts the day you open the account, backdated to the first of the year. So if you opened it today in 2024, it's going to be January 1st of 2024 that your 5-year clock starts. Now, quick life hack. If any of you on this webinar today, and I assume a lot of you do, have kids or even grandkids, I would argue, it's my opinion, all of them should have Roth IRAs. They should get them started as soon as possible to get tax-free compounding growth working in their favor. And so we can talk more about that if you have questions of what it takes to open a Roth IRA, how much you can put into a Roth IRA, why kids and grandkids should have it, all that kind of stuff. Make sure you put that in the Q&A box and we'll get those questions answered for you. But that's just a quick life hack. Now, ABC company stock can also go down in value. If ABC company stock goes down in value, frankly, it doesn't matter if your money's in the pre, post, or free bucket, you're going to lose money. It just is what it is. But you should note from a tax perspective, in the middle bucket, the post or after tax bucket, you can use those losses as a tax write-off. Okay. And you can also do something called tax loss harvesting, where you can use losses to offset gains, all this kind of stuff. So in other words, if you're going to lose money, the best bucket to do it in is the middle bucket, because at least there's a reprieve for those losses, right? You'd rather write off losses than not write them off and get some sort of tax break for it. So that's, I would argue, the best bucket to lose money in. Now, on the flip side of that, on the way up, what we just got done talking about, what's the best bucket to make money in? Well, that would be the Roth IRA, because I don't have to pay any taxes on the growth of that money. Which bucket is not the best bucket to lose money in, or the best bucket to make money in? Well, I would argue that's the Roth, or the 401k or the IRA, the traditional IRA. Because if it does make money, you have to pay the highest tax rates. If it loses money, you don't get to write it off. Now, what if you don't spend all the money? What if the money goes to the next generation? How does it work then? Well, if it's in a 401k or IRA, I would argue you have a debt on that money. That's the way I like to think about it, because in essence, that is exactly what it is. If I have a deferred tax bill in my money, that's not all of my money. In other words, if you have $1 million in a 401k, you don't really have $1 million, because some of that money is yours and some of it belongs to the IRS. It's a deferred tax bill. And if you still have that debt at your death, the IRS is going to be kind enough to pass that debt on to your beneficiary or whoever you choose to give that money to. So it's fully taxable at death. So let me think about it this way. If you were to pass away at 85, 90 years old, your kids are in their upper 50s, 60s, highest earning years of their careers typically. What I see more often than not is mom and dad chose not to pay the tax bill on IRAs and 401ks. They deferred. They end up giving that money to their kids. Their kids end up paying twice the tax rate on it that mom and dad would, had mom and dad just paid the debt off while they were alive. So I would argue the only one that wins in that scenario is the IRS. Now, it doesn't always work that way. I'm just telling you that more often than not, that's the way that I see it. So if you have IRA or 401k money and you're planning on using that money for your fun and lifestyle, of course it's important to figure out how and when to pull that money out to keep it tax efficient. But I would also argue if you have IRA and 401k money and you don't plan on using it for your fun and lifestyle, but instead plan on using it for a legacy to give to your kids or grandkids, it's equally, if not even more important to do some tax planning to figure out how to minimize that liability upon that transfer. Okay, middle bucket, the non-qualified investment bucket, after tax, post-tax, whatever you want to call it. The taxes of that stock that you have to pay while you're alive, should you sell that stock, in essence, kind of go away at your death. Let me explain. If you have a $1,000 investment, it grows to $10,000. You have $9,000 of gain. If you sell that stock while you're alive, you owe taxes on the $9,000 of gain. If you don't ever sell it, and that $9,000 of gain is still sitting in there untaxed, and that stock goes to your spouse or to your kids, they get to step up the cost basis to the stock price at the date of your death. In other words, they get to inherit the money as if they paid for that stock today's price versus what you paid for it when it was only worth $1,000. So they get to act as if they paid $10,000 for the stock. And if they turn around and sell it the next day and it's still only worth $10,000 because it hasn't really moved in one day, if they bought it for 10 and sold it for 10, what's their gain? Well, zero. So what's the tax bill on $0 of gain? Zero. So that stepping up of basis is really, really important and a cool feature in that middle bucket. Last but not least, Roth IRA. If you pass on a Roth IRA to the next generation, it's going to be tax-free to the next generation, just like it was tax-free to you. So if you think about it, again, if I'm going to leave money behind and I want to leave any sort of legacy, understanding the difference of how these buckets are taxed to the next generation or to your spouse become really important. Okay. It's not always that everybody should be leaving the after-tax bucket or everybody should be leaving Roth money, or there's always a right answer. It's going to be different depending on your scenario and situation, but it's definitely part of the equation of the, not even how much money you want to leave behind, but what type of money from a tax perspective you should be leaving behind. Last but not least is risk. All of you have risk in your portfolio, unless of course, all of your money's sitting in cash, which isn't probable or likely. So if you have any money in the stock market, in bonds, commodities, whatever, there's some sort of embedded risk inside of your investments. And all of you at some point have probably taken some sort of risk assessment or something to help you determine how much risk you should be taking based on what you're comfortable with. More often than not, what I see over 95% of the time is if you come out on that scale as like moderately conservative, fine, be moderately conservative. But what I see is your IRA is moderately conservative, your after-tax account is moderately conservative, and your Roth IRA is moderately conservative. The problem with that is I would argue it's tax inefficient, because you do not want to take the same amount of risk in every bucket from a tax perspective. From a tax perspective, you want your Roth IRA to be the most risky bucket, your IRA to be the least risky bucket, and the after-tax account to be somewhere in between. If you want to be moderately conservative, fine. Be moderately conservative. But have your Roth be aggressive, have your 401k be really conservative, and that non-qualified account be somewhere in between. Globally, your investment should still be moderately conservative, but stop tipping the IRS and taking risk in buckets that aren't efficient on the way up, they're not efficient on the way down, and they're not efficient to pass to the next generation. Part of that investment inventory or audit, something that will come out of that, if you want us to do that for you on a complimentary basis, is letting you know how much risk you're taking and where you're taking it. All right. Second concept, to defer or not to defer. We get the question all the time. Some of you put this in the chat box today, or the Q&A box. The chat box is disabled. In the Q&A box, something about Roth conversions, because it's all over the news. Should I be doing this? Should I not be doing this? The answer is simple. Some of you should and some of you shouldn't. And every year could be different. We've got families that we serve that some years we do Roth conversions and some years we don't. But let's go through the concept of what this is. So just so that all of you know, you all have the ability to take money out of your IRAs and convert it to a Roth IRA. So you go from pre-tax, tax deferred, to after-tax, tax-free, what I like to call off-the-grid money. When you do that, of course, on the way over, you have to pay the tax bill. So in my example, we have a $100,000 IRA. We have a 25% tax rate. If I want to convert that money to Roth, I got to pay the bill on the way over there. 25% of 100 grand is 25 grand. I'm going to end up with $75,000 in my Roth IRA. Should I choose to convert it? Is this a good deal or is this a bad deal? Well, kind of depends. Let's fast forward. If they're invested exactly the same and they double in value over a 10-year period, had I not done the Roth conversion 10 years ago and left the money in the IRA, my $100,000 would grow to $200,000. Had I done the Roth conversion 10 years ago, my $75,000 Roth would have grown to $150,000. This is where my industry has convinced all of you of the opportunity cost that you would lose if you took pre-tax money and paid the bill before you had to. Don't pay it until you absolutely have to. Let all of the money grow. Leave it in there as long as possible, and then just only pay the bill when you have to. That way, all of your money gets to grow. And they look at a chart like this, and they use this to prove their point. See, the IRA went from 100 to 200. The Roth only went from 75 to 150. The difference in value 10 years ago was 25 grand. The difference in value today is 50 grand. And they're not wrong in that math. Where they're, I don't know if wrong is the right word, maybe a little bit strong. But one of the steps that they're missing is, okay, now it is time to use the money. Now I'm retired. Now I have to pull it back out. Let's say your tax rates do not change. They were 25% 10 years ago. They're 25% today. We take the tax bill out of that pile of money. Here's how much money you have left. Well, which one's better? Well, you guys, they're exactly the same. You end up with the same amount of spendable cash. If you think about it, an IRA or 401k, if you have any money in those accounts, all you're doing is making the bet, I think my tax bill is going to be less tomorrow. Otherwise, why wouldn't you just pay the bill now? If you thought your bill was going up, well, let's just pay it off now at the cheaper rates versus waiting until tomorrow when they might be more expensive. The Roth IRA is a different gamble or bet. That is saying, hey, I think my rates are cheaper today. I'm just going to pay the bill now. That way I don't have to pay the bill later, which I'm assuming is going to be more expensive. I would argue the prudent thing is to have both, because we don't know where taxes are going to go. Remember that graph at the beginning? Taxes are all over the map. And I don't know, and you don't know. You and I can prognosticate. I'm sure you have opinions on where taxes are going to go. But the biggest problem that I see with most of the people that we interact with is that the majority of the money is in IRAs and 401ks, usually around 80% of it. So they're way overweighted or not diversified enough from a tax perspective. And so moving money from pre to post-tax accounts can be for diversification efforts. It can be for legacy purposes. There's a lot of reasons to think about it. Not everybody should do it, but it is a math equation. If you map out your taxes like we've been talking about, you can answer questions like, well, are my taxes cheaper today or are they going to be cheaper tomorrow? When the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expires, Brad, are my taxes going up? Or are they going down? Things like that. If you can answer those questions, it's going to begin to paint a clearer picture for you if you're a person that should be doing Roth conversions or shouldn't be doing Roth conversions. Last concept, we call this the widow's tax. Let me start by asking this question. If you are married, what are the odds that you and your spouse die on the exact same day? The answer is almost zero, right? And if you don't die on the same day or in the same year, there can be massive tax consequences, okay? Let me show this to you. Now, if you're not married, hang with me, because you know somebody who is, and you can share this concept with them and hopefully make an impact in their life. There's a big tax consequence to the death of a spouse. And so we've got spouse A and spouse B. They're both alive, they're healthy, living a fun retirement. Their budget is $8,000 a month. That's $96,000 a year. They take a standard deduction on their tax return. In 2024, that would result in a $6,718 tax bill. That's an average tax rate paid of 7.4%. Now, spouse A passes away. The widow or widower, spouse B, does what most surviving spouses do and meets with their CPA, their broker, whoever they work with. Says, hey, just lost the love of my life. I would love to maintain my lifestyle. Don't know if I can afford it. What does this look like? And the good news is, in my situation or case that we're looking at here, this particular person has plenty of money. That's not the problem. And so they can maintain this $8,000 a month lifestyle or $96,000 a year. The problem is they're not married anymore. So they no longer get to file a married filing joint tax return. They have to file as a single filer. So that same $96,000 of income with the standard deduction taken no longer results in a $7,185 tax bill. As you can see on the screen, it results in an $11,740 tax bill. That's an average rate of taxes paid on the same amount of income of 12.7%. If you're a math whiz, you would know that's a 60% increase in the average rate of taxes paid because your spouse passed away. Let me ask you this question again. What are the odds this is going to happen to you? If you're married, it's almost 100%. And so from a tax planning perspective, another thing that you just need to be cognizant of when you're thinking about kind of mapping out your taxes and trying to be as efficient as you possibly can is if you have the ability or opportunity to file a joint tax return, almost always your tax bill or effective rates paid are going to be cheaper than they are at the death of the first spouse. So this is another thing that needs to be taken into account when you're looking at things like Roth conversions. All right, that was a lot of information. One more checkpoint for you. Make sure you get these to-dos before you leave. Again, so you can take action on some of these concepts. Number one, have you performed or plan to effectively allocate your money to the 3 different buckets, pre, post, and free? Pre-tax, post-tax, tax-free. How much money should be in each bucket is going to be a case-by-case scenario depending on what your maps look like. But again, something that you need to be cognizant of. Do you have an IRA exit strategy? In other words, if you have a bunch of debt to the IRS inside of these IRAs and 401ks, do you have a plan to exit out of those accounts and pay that debt off as efficiently as possible and not overpay as we exit those accounts? And then is your plan set up for the unexpected death of a spouse? All right. So as we close, don't leave just yet. As we close, I want to make sure you all get an opportunity to take advantage of this additional 30 minutes of one-on-one time, which is an extension of today's workshop. So here's how you do that. Is on the bottom left-hand side of the screen, that little pop-up that we brought up earlier in the workshop should pop up again. If you click that link, it's going to take you to a calendar. That calendar is going to allow you to schedule 30 minutes with the highly trained fiduciary advisor that has this specialty in taxes so that you can get all of your questions answered. The other thing that you can get in that 30 minutes, there's more than this, but at least what we referenced today is a tax map and a tax report. So if you've never had anybody map out and give you reports on your taxes to help you understand where you stand today so we can kind of build an idea of where to go in the future and answer questions like, should I be turning my Social Security on? Should I be doing Roth conversions? Things like that. We can give that to you as a complimentary just for attending today. And then also the investment audit or inventory that we talked about. If you've never had anybody inventory everything that you own and kind of lift the hood and let you know what you actually have from an investment perspective so that you can make sure you're not overpaying in taxes or fees and expenses, we can do that for you as well. But at the end of the day, it's 30 minutes. It's virtual. It's over Zoom. Use that link that's on the screen to schedule that. And I would just encourage everybody, when you think about that to-do list that we gave you 3 different to-do lists. If there's anything on those lists that you have not already done, or somebody's not helping you do, then please take advantage of that 30 minutes. Let us help you complete your to-do list and make sure that you're not overpaying in taxes on the way down the mountain. Thank you so much for attending today. Enjoy the rest of your day, and hopefully you can begin to take action on some of the concepts that you learned to minimize one of the largest expenses you will have in retirement. Have a wonderful day, and hopefully we'll talk to you all soon.